Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma here about Kagurabachi chapter number 116. This chapter is titled Princess. As you know, like the Soga clan princess, like that's what the chapter's named after. Hokuzono, I know I've made so many memes and jokes on this channel of like you naming Kagurabachi chapters in very weird ways that don't really make sense, but you know what? I'll give this one to you. It's very quick, it's very to the point, like this chapter is about the Soga clan princess, Chiaki, and you know what, the chapter title really just does give that away, as does the first page, so you know what, like, legitimately just a round of applause, you Hokuzono. I give it to you. Good job on naming a chapter. And also just good job in writing a chapter on general, because this is easily one of my favorite types of Kagurabachi chapters, where it's just a bunch of very interesting lore we get sort of added into the idea here of the Chiaki princess, her relationship with Kunishige, more Akemura stuff, Soga. We even see a little bit, and by a little bit, I mean one panel of young Izami in this chapter as well, and eventually getting to the whole idea of, oh yeah, things are getting ready to get very serious soon in the Kagurabachi world as we end off this chapter with a story panel. I love this story. It's great. Kagurabachi is amazing. But of course, before we can talk about this chapter of Kagurabachi, we first need to talk about what happened last time on Kagurabachi. And mainly, it was a chapter focused on learning more about Subaru Urita, and mainly learning that he made everything up about forging swords, you know? And it was a very fun chapter, sort of getting more into Urita's psyche of, like, how he forges blades with sort of veins that help conduct spirit energy to be absolute killing weapons, instead of just, like, letting the process of forging a blade just do it anyway. We also got the title drop of The Enchanted Blades last chapter, and it was just a very little fun, cool thing, you know? And this chapter is also really fun because we sort of take a step back from all of that's happening and seeing what is happening at the same time in the greater story of the conflict over Hiroshima, Shokoku in Japan, and all of the various stuff going on. As we actually start off this chapter, as we see a young girl wakes up in a very ornate bedroom. And of course, this girl we will soon learn is Chiaki, who we know in the future becomes Chihiro's mother. And I went on Twitter for like a little bit after I read this chapter and read the rest of Jump as well. And I really just like all of the posts that people were making on Twitter of whenever Chihiro was waking up in the bed after, quote-unquote, dying to Samura. Well, I mean, he did die, but then Suzaku brought him back and all of that various stuff. And I just love how everybody was sort of putting their faces side by side like, bro, we don't need a DNA test. Like, Hokuzono is just really good at making his characters look a lot alike in this way. And of course, like, it's something to do with the way he draws his art style and characters. But at the end of the day, man, the two of them look a lot alike. But we see that Chiaki sort of like sits up in this bed and sort of like pulls up the covers off of her and just like sits up. And it's just a very ornate bedroom as she's just silent for a brief little moment as we get the title of this chapter of Kagurabachi. Kagurabachi by Takeru Hokuzono, chapter number 116, titled Princess. As we then cut outside to the Soga clan estate, where we see that two people are walking up towards it, and we recognize these two guys as Hasumi, this guy who we sort of see as like the head of the sorcery bureau, or at least maybe not the head of it, but he's the one who's in contact with all of the very important people. And behind him is also Mashiro. And as we see they're walking up to the front doors of the Soga clan estate, we see that Hasumi is like, hey, alright, this is very urgent. She probably had a dream about Shokoku, so be on your best behavior, Mashiro. The Sorcery Bureau owes our existence to them. And Mashiro sort of falling behind Hasumi, just being like, yep, I got it. As we see the two of them are sort of walking through this just very, like, upper class estate, like these giant pillars, very ornate designs all around. And they eventually get led into a room as we just get a little bit of narration. The gift is passed down through the Soga clan, and once every generation, it manifests in a legitimate female descendant. Hailed as an incarnation of the goddess Izanami, she predicts threats to the land of Japan. She foretells disasters such as earthquakes down to the precise date, hour, and location. The Danseki was discovered through one of her prophecies. For millennia, over countless generations, These prophets have alerted Japan to crises and change. Because of that, the power of the Soga clan is the sole dynasty of sorcerers that hold sway over the government's very core. We see the image of a very interesting looking room, sort of just all these tatami mats on the ground, and almost like an elevated stage where some more tatami mats are, and a little bit of a staircase that leads up to them. And sitting up on this higher level is, of course, who we will know in a minute is Chiaki. And it's very interesting being that her face is obscured by hanging tapestries from the ceiling. So, like, you see her body, but not her face. And also, on this ground level, there's a black tatami mat. And sitting here is a scroll right next to this big, like, burner-looking thing sitting in the middle of the room with just, like, it's a cauldron almost, you know? And there's just a few people who I presume to be sorcerers sitting around it here in the moment, all wearing this very ornate white headgear that also drapes over their faces, not allowing them to see what's actually going on. And we see Chiaki behind the thing, and in the back corner, we see a woman who later in this chapter we will learn is Chiaki's mother. And also, of course, Akemura's mother as well. As we get all of this narration, there's also a little note that we see by Shiba. It's just like, hey, our job is to serve as their liaison. So that's the job of all the people in the Sorcery Bureau, pretty much. But as we see that Hasumi and Mashiro enter this big, ornate room, Mashiro's just like, wow, what an intense atmosphere this is. And Hasumi is immediately like, quiet and sit down. And as Chiaki's mother, like I said, we'll learn that later on in this chapter, she looks over at Hasumi and Mashiro entering, and she's just like, all right then, let us begin. And Hasumi now looks around and just takes a look at everybody here in this room. And there's not that many people, but enough to almost fill up the entire perimeter as Hasumi and Mashiro walk up and sit pretty much in the middle of the room. They are the ones who are most important to hear this prophecy. As Hasumi just explains, that not all the attendees are members of the Soga clan. The Prophecy Rite is attended by representatives from sorcerer clans throughout Japan. The Sorcery Bureau, as the government's agency, has an unspoken understanding with these sorcery clans. We condone their practices, provided that they keep a low profile and refrain from harming ordinary citizens. And I really just love the look at all of this, as we just see a few guys sitting here. We get really focused on one guy with a mohawk, and we also see Kiora. Dude, Kiora Sazanami, I did not expect to see him in this flashback, but it makes perfect sense if sort of all of these sorcerer families know what's going on, for all of them to sort of be here to understand while all of these, like, sorcery conflicts are going on around Japan. It makes a lot of sense, and it also just shows sort of how interconnected all of sorcery in Japan is. It's a really cool thing. As you also just get a little bit of an idea of, like, hey, so the government where, like, Mashiro and Shiba are all over here, but we also see there's a few sorcery clans sort of going around. Of course, the Soga clan, Ko clan, Torides clan, a So clan, a Hiru clan, Ushi clan, and of course, the Sazanami clan. And we sort of understand the Ushi clan here is the same clan that this Mohawk sorcerer guy that we see is, because we see, like, there's the same Ushi symbol on his jacket. And I'm very glad I ended up going to Twitter after reading this chapter, because on Twitter I saw a tweet from somebody known as Piku Program. I've actually talked to him before on the Kabnabi Headquarters podcast, which I'm a part of, but they pretty much had a little bit of a tweet just going over all of the clans that we see in this chapter, and I think it's really interesting. We see that the first one he talks about is the so-called Cow clan, even though the chapter translated it as Ko instead. But we see that it's the same kanji as in Hyuki's name in Kagari, pretty much, and he sort of shows an example of that. So maybe that's where Hyuki is from. The next one, Sazanami, it's very self-explanatory. The Gyu or Bull clan, or Ushi as this chapter translates it instead, is the Mohawk guy, because of course we see the same sort of design on his jacket. Hiru, apparently we have seen this one before, and it sort of was brought up in the Kabnabi library at some point, just on a book we see on the wall, so fairly interesting there, I guess. Sai is also known as Fortress. In the chapter we see this one was actually translated as Turaide, instead of Sai, so fortress. So I don't really know the difference going on here. Maybe it's just a difference in translations, or maybe one's right and maybe one's wrong. Who is really the same? And then the final one, soul, which is translated the same, is known as music. So very interesting little just look into what all of the clan names mean there. And thanks, Pico Program, for the very informative tweet, you know? But either way, like, I popped off whenever we saw Kiora, and also just got a little bit more interest into all of the various clans, and hey, maybe we'll see them fight during the war, who really knows. But either way, Hasumi just continues on with his narration, saying, "The Prophecy Rite is a ceremony that unites the government to the Soga clan, Japan's leading family of sorcerers. It demonstrates the strong bond between the government and the sorcery world, and serves to maintain their tact understanding. In other words, Princess Soga is the symbol of that order." As everything in the room goes silent, as sort of all of the attention is very much focused on Chiaki standing at the front of the room, as she says, 8 days from now, several people from Shokoku will come ashore at Yurakuhama Beach. They come in peace. Afterwards, a ship will arrive bearing the royal family. And we see as Chiaki is giving this prophecy, we see that her eyes are almost sort of like glazed over here in the moment, like she's almost like talking as a figurehead and not as a person. As we see from this cauldron in the middle of the room, it seems to be ink inside of it, and this ink starts to rise up out of the cauldron in small little droplets. And these droplets go and fall onto this scroll in front of where the cauldron lies. And they plop down, forming words, sentences, and of course this prophecy. Before the scroll, after achieving all of the information it needs, wraps itself up and ties itself together. And we see that, like, all of the sorcerers in the back of the room are just, like, murmuring, like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And Mastro sort of looks, we see a bead of sweat just falling down his face. As Hasumi reaches forward and he says, "We understand, thank you." And he picks up the scroll and just takes it outside with himself pretty much. And that's really the end that we see of both Mashiro and Hasumi in this chapter after getting this very important piece of information. As we cut to sort of a back room in the Soga clan estate, where we see just like in a room somewhere, Chiaki is sitting down, sort of all ornately dressed and all of these sort of things, and we see that, of course, who we will know as her mother in a second walks into the room, and she's like, "Oh, Chiaki, you should rest now," and Chiaki's like, "Oh, thank you very much, mother." And we see that they're sort of like walking on one part of the estate, sort of, I don't know Japanese architecture. I really feel like to talk about manga, these things come up so much, especially in a series like Kagurabachi, where it's like, I should know, but sort of, it seems like there's that typical, like, garden in, like, the Japanese house in the estate, you know? And throughout each of, like, the sides, there's the railings with sort of all of the pathways on them, and Chiaki and her mother are walking on one pathway, and on another pathway, we see just inside a room are a few, as we'll sort of understand, servants of the Soga clan. As we see one of these people is just like, "Hey, look at Mistress Chiaki. Until just the other day, she was a servant like us." And one of the other ones like, "Yeah, she looks so legit now." As somebody else who's not really paying attention just says, "Well, she's from a lesser offshoot of the family. And normally, someone like her would never be crowned Princess Soga. Since the previous Soga died at such a young age before giving birth to a proper heir, and then 2 years ago, the gift of prophecy manifested unexpectedly in that girl." And the lady who's on the ground started telling this story is like shaking like a bizarre twist of fate. And yet, it's utterly amazing. In just 2 years, she and her brother have both achieved such illustrious heights. Oh, it's great. And one of the other person's like, "Well, there she goes again, but it's too bad that she can't even see her friends anymore. She used to be such a lively child, playing in the streets with the neighborhood boys." And at this point, of course, as we see sort of cut away from all of these attendants and servants of the general Soga clan, who I really take just to be people who you wouldn't think, like other like lesser members of the family who wouldn't be in line to become the heir and thus Princess Soga sort of helping out for all the dealings. And it just so happened that, hey, Chiaki ended up becoming the Princess Soga through some bizarre twist of fate, right? But at the top of page number 10, we just see a little panel where, like, hey, Chiaki's here playing kickball with Kunishige, Shiba, and, hey, young Izami. We don't see much of him, but he's around here too, pretty much, right? But as we cut away from this scene, we then see some swords clashing with each other, sort of just like clang, clang, boom, flash, all of those various swordplay sounds. And we see, oh, look, hey, it's the other Soga we really know. Soga Akemura, and he is sort of sitting down here and clashing swords with this guy, and eventually, oh, a blade gets cut completely, or no, I don't think it gets cut in half. I think it just, like, comes out of the guy's hand who Soga's fighting, this trainer of some kind, and Soga sort of, like, holds his play blade up at the neck of this guy, and this guy's like, oh, God, and Soga's like, did you go easy on me? And he's like, don't. I need to get stronger. I need to make the elite guard as soon as possible. And the trainer's like, no, Soga, I didn't do any of that whatsoever. I didn't do any of that whatsoever, man. You're just really strong. As we sort of just get a little bit of like an explanation of like, hey, the top 5 warriors of the Soga clan serve as the princess's personal bodyguards. As this trainer's just like, hey, Master Akimura, I've told you time and time again, the only criteria you haven't met is the age limit. If it was just about fighting skill, hell, man, you'd already be a commander. And he just thinks like, wow, that's some real ferocity for a 16-year-old kid, pretty much, right? But all of this gets sort of interrupted as Akimura looks over and he's like, oh, hey, it's my big sister. As we see Chiaki sort of like looking at him, she's like, hey, Akimura, are you training again? Well, don't overdo it. And he's like, hey, but I gotta get strong enough to protect you, big sis. And Chiaki's like, hey, don't overdo it. What if you wreck your body? Then what are you going to do? And Akimura sort of like droops his head down like, yeah, you're right, sister. And then sort of whenever she walks away, he sort of leans over and he's like, hey, you want one more match? And the guy's like, oh my gosh, what are we really doing here? As we then cut over to another room, as we see that Chiaki is standing here and her mother is helping her with her hair. As her mother just says, hey, Chiaki, nobody says you're unsuitable anymore. Chiaki and Akemura, I am just so proud of both of you. And Chiaki's like, sounds good. And she's like, oh, what's the matter, daughter? As Chiaki just thinks a little bit, the prophecies come in fragmented images, but vivid ones at that. Unlike normal dreams that fade upon waking, they're crystal clear, but sometimes it can just be hard to judge. As we see that Chiaki's mother's just like, hey, tell me, even if it's something very small, it might one day be important to this country's future. As Chiaki sort of like pouts a little bit, she's like, well, in a vision I had, it was a really clear one too, I saw Kunishige, and her mother's very alarmed, like we even just see an exclamation point in her speech bubble. As Chiaki's like, well, I think Kunishige's in Tokyo, just, maybe, and she's just blushing a little bit, and her mother sort of looks over, and you think that boy has some bearing on the future of Japan? Like, honestly, child, what are we doing here? And Chiaki's like, maybe he does. And her mother just stands up like, you never give up, do you? I thought we put an end to this after last year's incident. And we see one of the other just persons in the room, the attendant, is like, oh, last year's incident? As Chiaki's mother just says, well, that Kunishige boy and this girl right here were exchanging letters through a member of the Sorcery Bureau for an entire year. As we get the idea, yeah, this was Shiba's doing, like, yep, he's a meddler. He knows what he's doing, you know? And I just really love how Chiaki's mother's like, never satisfied, corrupted by your worldly desires, to the detriment of your sacred gift. You need to forget that boy. And that uncouth loudmouth, I keep imploring the Sorcery Bureau to just fire him already. And I just really love how Chiaki's mother's just like so upset here in the moment, just like, that goddamn Shiba, interfering with my daughter and, of course, that Kunishige guy. And we just see that Chiaki's sort of just, like, looking down, and she's sort of, like, she obviously really likes Kunishige, you know, and she's sort of, like, not sort of paying attention here as Chiaki's mother's just like, hey, you are the Soga clan's esteemed princess. If you go on about consorting with some peon, imagine the disgrace you'll bring to the family. Your destiny is to marry a man from a well-born lineage and to dedicate yourself to the life of this country and family. It's a great honor, Chiaki. And of course, Chiaki's like, yes, I know, mother, and I'm sorry. And we just see a panel of her sort of looking on into the distance. And we then cut over to Kunishige, who is also staring, but in the opposite direction, almost like the two of them are looking at each other, you know, as we just hear Shiba's voice in the background, like, you sure? Do you just really want to give up just like that? And Kunishige's like, what do you mean, Shiba? And Shiba's like, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Chiaki, of course. You want me to take her another letter or something like that? Like, they'll never notice if it's just one. Or how about this? I could take you there in person. It's going to be like a surprise reunion, you know? And I love how Kunishige's like, dude, Shiba, like, you're just going to get yourself fired. And he's like, but whatever, nah, it's way better this way. I really just don't want to give her trouble. A guy like me should just live for the sword. And she was like, sure, dude, if you say so, like, but you're just boring. Like, we could have a little bit of action here, you know? And then Kunishige's stomach growls, just like he's still really hungry, and is like, hey, so how about all of that food? Like, I'm about to drop dead over here. As from behind the door where they sit, we see a voice ring out. Hey, boy. As we see Itsubaru Arita, as he opens the door and walks inside and says, hey, buddy, how about you stick around a little longer? I'll feed you plenty well. As we see that he brings in a little bit of food, some Subaru special rice balls. And Kunishige is like, oh my gosh, rice balls, oh, it's incredible. But at that point, we also just fade to black. As the last part of this chapter is just wrapped in a little bit of narration about the world of Kagurabachi. 8 days later, just as the prophecy foretold, 3 people from Shokoku landed on Japan's shore. They delivered a letter and left, and the letter requested a meeting with Shokoku's royal family. It was written in Japanese. On March 20th, the Hiroshima talks. Beneath the solitary pine tree on the shore of Hiroshima, the two nations met to discuss the rights to mine the Danseki. And that's where we end this chapter of Kagurabachi, with this story panel seeing a lone pine tree, and then of course a coffee table and 2 couches on either side on the shores of the beach of Hiroshima. And yeah, this is just such a fun Kagurabachi chapter, and I don't know why, but sometimes, like, whenever I'm reading manga, I'm just not vibing. I'm like, all right, I'll read the next chapter whenever it comes out next week. But man, I just want to know what happens so much right now. Maybe like the 2-week break that we had to get between 115 and, of course, 116 here. But man, I just really want to know what's going to happen next time. Like, I just loved this chapter almost in its entirety. I love the intrigue about the Soga clan, and of course, why Chiaki is the princess, you know, like what lineage and what sort of twist of fate really happened to make it go here, or even if that's something we're going to be looking at in sort of the realm of the story. But sort of realizing just how interconnected all of this stuff is with the sorcery clan, all of the sorcery borough, and just all of this various stuff, and also just seeing how Chiaki and Kunishige sort of have this little bit of a relationship, and I just really like Chiaki's design. I think she's pretty cute and cool, like, nothing much really to say about it there. And also, like, I just want to see Chiaki be able to stand up to her mother at some point, who's just like, hey, you're the Soga clan's princess. You're supposed to marry some high-up family guy and live out your life, pretty much. And Chiaki's like, yeah, I get that, and I'm sorry. Of course, like, knowing that she wants something else for herself. Like, just sort of like one of those break-the-cycle type story things. And honestly, we don't know much about the Soga clan. is Chiaki still alive? I don't think she is, but I mean, there's always a possibility. And if Chiaki is dead, then who knows, there could be another Soga Princess who is now currently giving prophecies. Either way, we will see one of the Soga Princess at some point in this story almost assuredly. And also the very end of the chapter of Subaru being like, hey Kunishige, I am bringing you under my wing, let's forge some swords together. And also the story panel at the very end of the chapter, where we see a pine tree, which isn't the most important thing in Kagurabachi, but also, I mean, if we think about it, who do we know has pine tree sorcery? Hat Shaku, and we may see him for the first time in this arc in this moment. And story panels always just show what's important for the very story of Kagurabachi, and this is one of those moments. So yeah, so really I don't have much else to say about this chapter of Kagurabachi besides that I loved legitimately everything about it, and yeah, with all of that being said, I'll catch you guys next time for Kagurabachi chapter number 117. This chapter was titled Princess, and yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. This will be Glowplasma, signing out.